meditation, asking all of you to close your eyes, quiet your minds, and travel with me to a peaceful place in the woods of New England. No cheaters now. Everyone come along and join in. I want to see closed eyes on every face in every pew. There's a brilliant explosion of fall colors against a blue sky, a peaceful hush of the deep woods, and a mirror-like, still and expansive pond in front of you. Are you there yet? Across that pond is where the stream that cascades down from the mountains enters the pond. An image of those mountains, the trees, and the cobalt blue sky are reflected in the mirror-like surface of the still pond. Again, are you there yet? Well, now let's stir things up a bit. The 5-year-old in you sees a stone at your feet that is just way too tempting. Tempted, you say? For what? Let's make some waves, man. Again, keep those eyes closed as you toss that stone into the pond and witness now a miracle. The peaceful reflections are gone, only to be replaced by wave after wave that emanates across the pond from just that one small stone. Each wave follows the other, making concentric circles that grow and grow and grow, multiplying in size and number. 10 feet, 40 feet, 100 feet across as they reach the shore and reflect back. Now open your eyes. You've witnessed a visual image of what I am calling the miracle of multiplication. Yes, there's a lot of physics at work in the pond to make this happen, but just standing back and watching it unfold is no less miraculous. I'm going to ask Pastor Allison for a little help here. Our theme for this year is Your Gifts Multiplied. And the scriptural reading this morning is the basis of feeding the multitude of Jesus' followers with loaves and fishes. And I say stories plural because there are actually 2 instances where a small number of loaves and fishes were used to feed thousands. The first story, the feeding of 5,000, is the only miracle, other than the resurrection itself, repeated in all 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Its messages were clearly important enough to rate this level of attention by all 4 Gospel writers. The second one that followed is the feeding of the 4,000 and is only recounted in the books of Matthew and Mark. There are many parallels between the 2, but most of my focus will be on the first one. Let me take you to that place. On the shores of the Sea of Galilee is the plain of Bethsaida, the place Jesus retreated to after hearing the horrible news of the beheading of John the Baptist. The disciples who had gone out to preach on their own reunited with Jesus here. Even though the place was remote with no sources of food or water, crowds of Jesus' followers still came, seeking to hear him and to be healed, which he did. As I see it, there are 3 lessons in this scriptural story, and it is at this point they begin. First, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves food." What do you imagine Jesus said here? They do not need to go. You give them some food. Jesus' challenge to the disciples is a daunting one. Let them stay and you feed them. In today's world, where immigrants seeking asylum are being turned away and children separated from their families, do we not see many examples of closed borders, doors, and communities to those in need? As a church who defines ourselves as a community of Christ, welcoming all people, learning to love and serve God and neighbor, what have we done? Did we not welcome the homeless into our church despite the challenges that entailed? Did we not open our doors to all people when we made our journey to becoming an open and affirming church? Our church family has many times in the past been open to help and love others, and our vision is to continue responding to Jesus' call. What role do we play as individual members of this church family in listening for and discerning Jesus' call? The second lesson is learning about and dealing with the fear that we may not have the resources to respond to that call. The scope of the task is great, and beyond what the disciples can imagine possible. In the version from John, it is Philip who says that 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. How often do we feel limited in what we can bring and share compared to all the possible needs in the world? What happens this time of year when it comes time to ponder your stewardship pledge? I once heard a great definition of fear in a group meeting that I attended. F-E-A-R. False evidence appearing real. Let me repeat that. False evidence appearing real. We create these fears in our mind. They gather strength, they gather energy. And Jesus' call is to take that fear head on and open your mind to the possibilities. I'm not suggesting we be Pollyannish about the assessment of our resources. But at the same time, we should open ourselves to trusting Jesus, his call to us, and how we respond. Returning to the version of the story in John, it is a young boy who comes forward with 5 small loaves and 2 small fish. Jesus often uses children to convey the innocence and openness needed to counter the fears we've built up within ourselves as adults. And this leads me to the third lesson I see in this scriptural story, and that is the miracle of multiplication. In today's vernacular, you can hear at this point in the scripture, Jesus saying, I got this. Okay. He took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those that were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. The result is that all 5,000 were fed with leftovers to spare. To me, faith lives in the gap between my factual knowledge of the world and the possibilities of miracles that love can do as taught to us by Jesus. This is key to the stories of the loaves and fishes. Giving what we can and having the faith that will deliver beyond what we can imagine. Do we see this miracle right here in Saugatuck? Maybe sometimes we miss it. If someone said 10 years ago, or maybe a little longer, we have over 50 people go on youth mission trips, would that have made much sense? How many volunteers would we need? How much money would it cost? My goodness, that's a big number. But thanks to the leadership of Michael and Kim and many others, we actually have something that at this point in time is a vibrant, joyful, and yes, larger than imagined activity that adds to the life of this church and the greater town of Westport. So how have your gifts been multiplied? What have you seen? And what might you imagine in the future if you approach it with the innocence and imagination of a child? I'd like to relate my own personal miracle of multiplication story. I started out a number of years ago through our Angel Gifts program, giving a shirt or two to the men of Pivot Ministries. Seemed like a good thing to do. But one year I was late in purchasing the shirts and ended up having to deliver them myself. Art being late? How was that new news? Figuring I would just drop them off at the office, it would not take all that much time to go up and back to Bridgeport and, take care of delivering them. But it did not turn out that way. The executive director insisted he take me on a tour of the facility and meet some of the men. As I toured the classroom, met some of the men, walked through the greenhouse, I got a much deeper insight and appreciation of how a gift to the group multiplied in so many ways. As each man greeted me, a stranger in their midst, openly and honestly, I saw so much more than just a shirt. A man coming out of recovery, getting his high school degree, going home to a family that needed him, children that would benefit from him being sober and being a larger part of their lives. No, this was not one shirt for one man, but some small part that helped lead to an entire community benefiting from this man's faith journey at Pivot Ministries. So to summarize, here are my 3 takeaways from the lessons of the loaves and fishes. The first is that Jesus will at times challenge us beyond what we possibly can imagine. We need to be open to that call. Second, our human nature leads us to naturally fear that we do not have the resources to deliver on that call. Approach those fears with the innocence and openness of a child. Third, the miracle of faith assures us that our gifts will indeed be multiplied beyond our expectations. Jesus is constantly pulling us along to believe and have faith. In fact, at the end of the story of the 4,000 feeding, Jesus actually counseled his disciples to have faith as they continued to express their fears. This is our message for stewardship this year. Your gifts multiply. The vision of a community of Christ, welcoming all people, learning to love and serve God and neighbor. Please, as you receive your pledge card and letter in the mail, prayerfully consider your vision of how your gift is multiplied through this amazing church family of Saugatuck Church. Remember this small stone tossed into the pond, making wave after wave and growing into large circles across that entire pond. And while you're at it, thinking about your pledge, I'd like you to think a little more broadly. Maybe about making some big waves with your stewardship pledge this year and making it an incredibly successful campaign for the life of this church. Peace and blessings to you all.